these difficult times. Please just give me an indication when Mrs. Gandhi is connected to the extent. Oh yes. Sorry, I also forgot to introduce our evidence leader, Mr. Boang Jones, well known during the course of the unrest hearings, where he has participated as one of our main evidence leaders. And we also have with us our acting CEO, Ms. Chantal Kisoon, and we welcome her to the proceedings. Mrs. Gandhi, can you hear me?
No issue to message because of the age.
Chair.
Yes, please. That will be appreciated.
Yeah. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mrs.
On
Gandhi.
behalf of the compilers and endorsers of our submission, I thank you for giving us the opportunity
to
start, make an oral submission before your commission.
Sorry, can I interrupt
Having
you?
closely followed the proceedings of this commission's extensive and laudable work towards
pause for a moment, Ms. Singh? Just pause for a moment. You need to be sworn in.
I don't think she can
Just
hear.
once.
KwaZulu-Natal felt the need to make a comprehensive submission to further enhance the work already done by your commission. We were driven by both the constitutional imperative to create a new social order based on our common nationhood and democratic principles upheld in our constitution, and because we felt it important to place before you a broader view of the unrest contained in our submission. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Mrs. Gandhi? Can you hear me?
We can hear each other here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you quite clearly. So before we start,
We can hear this at Ila.
we welcome you to...
Okay, but I don't think they can.
Can you hear me?
There's certainly a connection problem.
Yeah.
Okay, can our people just look into that, please? You hear me now?
You can. Should I go through?
No, she can't hear.
Okay.
Can you hear now?
No.
Can you hear me now? Oh.
What we could do, Chair, could do a patch through the phone just to complete.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Sorry, we still can't hear you.
Yeah, if I can just.
I can't hear a thing.
Just check the, I just need to check the mics again. Sorry, can someone please speak into the mic?
Hello? You still can't hear? No. Okay. Yes, may I have the phone?
Okay, okay, no, fine, it's fine.
Can you hear?
Oh, Ramesh, thank you.
Okay. Oh,
Okay, I'll get through. Just give me a moment.
now you can hear me.
I can hear you, Ila.
Yeah, but it seems like
Ravi is calling. No. Ravi is calling Ramesh now. Then maybe you're gonna have to use his phone and speak. Ravi is calling now.
Ramesh, can you put your phone on speaker so Ela can hear you. No, I understand. I'm in the session. Everybody can hear us at the moment. Just put you on speakerphone so that Ela can hear you.
Okay, I've been within IMC.
You want to do? You can swear straight.
Yeah.
Hello, Ela, it's Russ. Hello, Ela, can you hear me? Yes, I can. I'm handing you over to the chair from the wall. First. Before you
Good afternoon, are you well?
Good afternoon.
That's great. We can hear and see
We can hear and see you quite clearly, so I'm just going to swear you in and then you can continue with your evidence.
Okay, thank you.
Are you willing to take the oath?
Are you willing to take the oath, or do you want to affirm the truth of your evidence?
I'm willing to take the oath.
Do you consider the oath as
Do
binding?
you consider the oath as binding on your conscience?
Yes, I do.
Do you swear that your evidence?
Do you swear that your evidence will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please raise your
right hand and say so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Thank you very much. You may continue now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to present our oral submission before you. Having closely followed the proceedings of this Commission's extensive and laudable work towards the compiling of a report on the July 21st unrest, a large group of concerned people, predominantly from KwaZulu-Natal, felt the need to make a comprehensive submission to further enhance the work already done by your Commission. We were driven by both the constitutional imperative to create a new social order based on our common nationhood and democratic principles upheld in our Constitution, and because we felt it important to place before you a broader view of the unrest contained in our submission. While we are cognizant of the fact that your inquiry is aimed at addressing the violations of fundamental human rights contained in our Constitution, among which are rights, and I quote, to just administrative action, protection of human dignity, and to be free from all forms of violence from public or private sources. Close quote. The July unrest reveals the fact that communities were left without any protection and had to take measures to protect themselves. Why this did happen, and why did it happen in a particular section of our country, namely KwaZulu-Natal and sections of Gauteng only, are questions that need to be interrogated. Our submission tries to address these issues. As indicated, our aim in making the submission is to move away from the divisions of the past, from narrow parochial perspectives towards the broader aim of promoting nation building and social cohesion. We see, for instance, historically, that in the past, apartheid government tried to divide us on various issues, ethnic, racist divisions. But today, and since the democratic order has been established in this country, we want to move away from those narrow divisions and become a South African nation. Our presenters are highly respected community leaders with a track record of many years of service in the community. Honorable Lavigesan Pillay, who will make the main submission, supported by Hershila Narsi Shyam Maraj, Roshan Jaina, Prevan Vedan, Selvan Chetty, and Pubalan Govindsamy, just to name a few. The submission has been compiled by prominent leaders, among whom are the presenters together with others, such as Honorable Mageswari Governor, Honorable Yusuf Bamji, Honorable Babu Beju, Loganathan Naidu, and Pubalan Govindsamy. Further, it is endorsed by individuals amongst whom are Bishop Reuben Philip, Professor Paulus Zulu, Judge Navanitham Pillai, Professor Jairam Reddy, Ina Kraniya, Judge Bharat Ratnan Pillai, Honorable Important Samson Mkhize, Imam Irshad Sufi, Mbangeni Zuma, Mbuso Madondo, Ashwin Chikamji, Kistan Govender, and many others. Also endorsed by various community organizations, faith-based organizations, and NGOs, among which are Phoenix Ubuntu Forum, Peace and Development Forum in Pietermaritzburg, Linda Zama Foundation, Nelson Mandela Community Youth Center, Dennis Hurley Center, Active Citizens Movement, Africa Unite, South African Muslim Network, which is known as SAMNET, Education, Culture and Welfare Foundation of Pietermaritzburg, South African Hindu Mahasabha, Sports Veterans Association in Pietermaritzburg, and many other organizations. Thank you for allowing us to make this oral submission in addition to the written submissions that we have already made. Honorable Pillai will now present our submission. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Honorable Pillai is indeed also the MEC for Economic Development in KwaZulu-Natal, although he is not making the submission today in that capacity. Are you willing to take the oath, or do you want to affirm the truth of your evidence?
I am prepared to take the oath.
Do you consider the oath as binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you swear that your evidence will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, so help me God.
Please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Please continue, sir. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let me recognize all the commissioners who are here, both physically and online. Let me also appreciate the opportunity. And I drew the short straw because this hearing is in Johannesburg. I'm sure if it had been in KZN, there would have been more capable people. But thank you for this opportunity. I think let's concede a bit that it might, and I'll appeal for your patience, because it might be a bit dated in some ways, because we made this submission on the 28th of January, or stated the 28th of January, and a lot has happened since then. But I do believe that the issues are so important that it bears repetition. In any case, the more views that concur, I think would help in decision making and recommendations. Let me confirm that it is a collective submission, and Ms. Ilagandi has already listed a whole range of names, not all of them, and they've all listed in the first page of the submission. Suffice to say, it's a wide range of very respected leaders, public intellectuals, academics, religious sector, and civil society. So we'd like to think we're a group of progressive organizations and individuals from KwaZulu-Natal who have a history of involvement in the South African struggle for national liberation, who have been involved and continue to be involved in human rights and community work as either activists or leaders, and are profoundly concerned about what transpired during the July 2021 unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. We remain deeply committed to building a non-racial and non-sexist democratic post-apartheid society and entrenching the values espoused in our Constitution. It is our fervent hope that this submission becomes an effective contribution to achieving the objective of nation building. And Chair, we start with that as the title of the submission for very good reason. And the submission will take us through difficult terrain because that's the nature of these hearings. We have to confront painful truths, but rely on the overwhelming goodness of the vast majority of people, as we have historically done, to take us through difficult times. So that's the overall objective of this submission. Again, this commission does not need any lessons on the Constitution, but it's at times like this that we ourselves revisit the Constitution to remind ourselves of what it says. And the preamble conjoins us to, and I quote, heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights, unquote. It goes on as follows. The Republic of South Africa is one sovereign, democratic state founded on the following values: human dignity, the achievement of equality, and the advancement of human rights and freedoms, non-racialism and non-sexism, and supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of the law. Again, apologies, this is the bread and butter of the Commission's work. But again, as I said, we can never tire of repeating. It is proper that at the outset, we wish to express our sincere condolences and deepest sympathy to the families and friends of all those who lost their lives or suffered severe injuries, as well as those who lost their jobs or businesses during the July 2021 unrest in our country. We lament this devastating loss of lives, injuries, and economic hardships, as well as the unnecessary damage and destruction to property that has brought great suffering to the people of our country. And we therefore felt compelled to make a contribution to ensuring that the events of July 2021 do not occur again. So that's starting point for the submission. So we hope it will contribute to a deeper understanding of the underlying causes of the events of July 2021. Yes, as per the terms of reference of the Commission, but also for society broadly. Like many other patriotic South African citizens and organizations, we too have questioned how it was possible, and it was a very painful questioning, how is it possible that deliberate economic sabotage, destruction of property, killing of people, and creation of chaos and mayhem could occur in a democratic South Africa which is guarded by one of the best constitutions in the world. So in making this submission, we therefore hope to add value to the outcome of the Commission's investigation, more particularly by considering how to prevent a repeat of the July events.
Well, please just put our cell phones off.
So in so doing, this submission draws out examples of positive lessons learned from communities and leaders who prevented violence, destruction, and economic collapse in their areas through initiatives that could be paralleled in the future. We have observed the proceedings of the current hearings of the Commission with great interest. The Commission's initiative to undertake this investigation is applauded, and we congratulate the Commission for ensuring the participation of a wide array of stakeholders in its hearings. We are at the same time deeply concerned that the Commission and indeed the public have not as yet been provided with detailed information on several issues. And I accept again that this was on the 28th of June, but I think the statement largely stands, although there have been significant submissions since then. And we wish to draw the attention of the Commission to the following issues in particular. Information about the deaths that occurred during the July 2021 violence. And I think the situation is serious enough to warrant that it's reasonable to ask what is the cause of death of each of the estimated 340 deaths that occurred during July 2021. For instance, how many people were shot, how many people lost their lives due to stampedes or fire. And we believe that post-mortem reports should be the source of much of this information. Yes, it will be a grind to process that, but I think it's important. When did these deaths actually occur? What was the date and time of these deaths? Where did these deaths occur? How and when were the bodies of the deceased identified and removed to mortuary facilities? Indeed, it will be helpful to obtain a systematic account of the above, especially in terms of time and space, as this information can provide greater insights into how the events of July played out. We submit that the collation of such evidence is essential for a comprehensive report and findings by the Human Rights Commission. We are of the view that the Commission runs the risk of arriving at incomplete findings in the absence of such detailed evidence and factual information regarding the above issues. We also reflect on police action or inaction. And again, we are aware that the President himself made a submission after we had submitted this particular document. And much has been said, and the President, I think, in part has conceded about the lackluster response by the police in quelling the violence that enveloped the province, both in the media as well as in submissions to the Commission. As indicated in the testimonies provided by the Durban and Pietermaritzburg Chambers of Commerce, the police did not respond appropriately to the Chamber's repeated attempts at communication, and police presence was largely lacking in many of the areas where burning and looting occurred. In order to better understand why the police were unable to protect people and property, this submission seeks to highlight some questions that remain unanswered regarding this role of the police and the intelligence services. And some of them will be: what information about the impending violence and sabotage was provided by the intelligence services to the police service? To whom was it provided, and when was it provided? And I think, notwithstanding the explanations that have been given in this intervening period, we respectfully submit that that question remains. How did the police respond to this information? Were senior police officials aware of messages on Twitter and in WhatsApp groups that instigated burnings, violence, looting, and destruction, and other actions that undermined law and order and the Constitution? Were there members in the security establishments themselves who actively supported the so-called insurrection? If so, who are they? Are they still members of the police force? And will they be held accountable for not carrying out their duty to protect the public? To what extent were resources a constraint to police? And we asked the question, but believe it was a very, very meaningful or major issue. Resources were a constraint to police carrying out their mandate during the July violence. To what extent was there effective coordination between the different components of the security cluster and within and between the national and provincial spheres of government? I think this too is a key question. If we can then go to some causes and characterization of the unrest. Undeniably, the trigger for the unrest was the arrest and incarceration of our former president, President Zuma. The underlying causes, of course, reside in the deep-seated inequalities, continued high unemployment, poverty, and resultant sense of hopelessness of a large number of South Africans. And this provided fertile ground for what we believe were unscrupulous and opportunistic political and criminal elements to plan, instigate, and foment the violence, looting, and arson that ensued. We have the view also that the unrest has its roots in, inter alia, the well-publicized factional battles within the ANC. These deep divisions in our governing party have inevitably found expression in many organs of state, resulting in state paralysis and lack of leadership, especially in the first few days of the unrest. The unavoidable inference is that the organizers, whoever they may be, that their objective was to weaken the leadership of the ANC and shift the balance of political forces both within the ANC as well in society as a whole. It is submitted that the high-level strategy of the instigators was to destabilize the South African economy and create chaos and mayhem. The above conclusions are inescapable when one examines key social media messages, including the infamous "let everything burn" message on Twitter. A series of voice notes on social media by another instigator over a number of days are paraphrased as follows. Firstly, as a general call to revolt, attack and burn. Secondly, a call to intensify the unrest and accept that there will be casualties. And I interpreted this as a response to criticism that black business and vulnerable were becoming victims. A call to target symbols of white monopoly capital and specifically trucks bearing the branding of big companies. And then the same voice note praising, inverted commas, fighters for their attacks in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, and inciting similar action in other provinces such as Northwest. Now, our experience indicates that the modus operandi appears to have been to incite, primarily through an intensive social media campaign, then to mobilize by highlighting grievances relating to poverty and unemployment, incentivize, by some cases using money to incite general unrest, and there's an affidavit which talks to a specific instance where money was paid, and then organized through the use of advanced teams who would break into identified targets, creating access for others to follow and setting fire to businesses and property in a manner designed to cause maximum damage. We believe that it is too coincidental for the above pattern to have been repeated in so many different geographical areas without proper planning, resources, and coordination. The conclusion is therefore inescapable that the events of July did not represent, if I may quote, popular uprising of the masses due to social and economic grievances, close quote, as some have been prone to suggest. Instead, the events in July can be construed as the outcome of a strategy that had been developed even prior to the incarceration of our former president. We also believe that one of the underlying causes is the culture of impunity that pervades our society. And the submission talks about the trucking industry. On the July at Moy River, I think there were 18 trucks that were burnt in that first instance. And subsequently, I think the assessment was 37 trucks were burnt or torched during the unrest as a whole. And many of these incidents occurred at the Moy River Toll Plaza. Of course, the N3, and we might come back to that point, is a key economic arterial road. So we asked the questions that, the Moy River Toll Plaza needs special attention. It has been a hotspot for some time. And again, I'm aware that there's been some work done between January and now, but not quite complete. And as I said, these incidents were reported at the Moy River Toll Plaza. And this is a well-known hotspot for several years. So why was there no, let alone adequate, security deployment made in reasonable anticipation of more incidents or attacks there? The problems in the trucking industry have been well articulated in the public domain. And the aggrieved stakeholders appear to be organized, and we hope there's a shift now, because as recently as yesterday there was an attempt to engage and direct that particular conflict into a constructive channel. But there have been repeated resort to unlawful means to achieve their demands. Yet investigations, arrests, prosecutions, convictions, and deterring sentencing appear to be non-existent. And so we become subject to an argument that there is state failure. So we believe it is important for the state to uphold the law and act against those who commit crime and violence. A similar culture of impunity pervades with what has been called the business mafia or business forum. And again, I must qualify that, and I've been part of some of that work that has been done between the date of this submission and now. But it still needs to be put on the front burner to be dealt with. and there's instances of use of violence, blackmail, and other means to contest or gain tenders that have been known to operate unhindered for many years. The construction mafia, might be inaccurate to call it a construction mafia because they seem to be of general application, and wherever there is a construction of any size or any activity of any size, then they emerge to then threaten if they've not been included in the tender or did not receive subcontract. And this points to a slow build-up to the rupture of the state, which is seemingly unable to do anything about such illegal actions. So in effect, therefore, the twin phenomena of impunity and state rupture have laid the foundations, or part of the foundations for the unrest, and could be construed as some of the underlying causes thereof. Of course, corruption and state capture too have been central in perpetuating impunity. Indeed, they too created the conditions. As is well known, corruption and state capture have resulted in the hollowing out and weakening of state institutions. So to the point where what you would expect to be a basic response is not forthcoming. Of course, we can't examine this issue in a vacuum. We are a product of our history. And so over 300 years of colonialism and apartheid have left their mark on current South African society. The scars of oppression, poverty, economic, social, and legal injustices and inequality remain with us to today. And we have to concede that sadly, 27 years later, and despite attempts by successive post-apartheid governments, we remain a deeply unequal society, with high levels of unemployment and poverty, as well as poor service delivery. So, we are quite firm that that provides a fertile ground for the instability in July. It is not in dispute that the July 2021 unrest took place against the backdrop of an economic recession in our country and the COVID-19 pandemic which came to our shores in March 2020. COVID has fundamentally aggravated the crisis of inequality, unemployment, and poverty, which in turn served as enabling conditions for unrest. So again, in attempting to understand further the underlying causes, it is important to identify the kinds of social actors who came to play. And we want to suggest and submit that there were different categories of people who were involved in a particular political, socio-economic context. Of course, we've said already that it's against the backdrop of deep levels of poverty, unemployment, inequality. But it's important to note that there is often a toxic overlap between race and inequality. And again, these provide fertile grounds for agent provocateurs and those with ill intent and ulterior motives. So in this regard, we submit that, of course, there were the masses of the poor who participated in looting, while instigated were largely opportunistic and did not participate with associated demands. There were also those who participated who cannot be characterized as indigent, arrived in very nice motor vehicles and participated in that looting. The third category can only be described as organized crime, where people came equipped with angle grinders to cut out ATM machines and trucks to load large amounts of looted goods, even large items. Some even used heisters to move or load looted goods. Finally, there's that group which in our view must bear maximum culpability, and that is that group of people who individually or collectively organized, coordinated, or incited the unrest with a diabolical agenda, which we believe to have been the destabilization of the democratic state and the advancement of a political agenda. At best, these actions were reckless. It is more probable that these actions were deliberate and the consequences intended. This conclusion is substantiated by the clearly targeted nature of many of the attacks. And as I said, many of which attacks were characterized by advanced groups armed with petrol containers to set fire to property and not just loot. A further observation is a clear intent to target supply lines and distribution centers, resulting in an ensuing food security crisis. And this threat actually loomed very large and took an extraordinary effort to avert. If your roads were not operating, if your fuel is not operating, if your distribution centers have been attacked in a targeted way, it's only a matter of days before the shops and supermarkets would have had empty shelves. And I pay tribute to those who have participated in that extraordinary effort to pull things back from the abyss. So again, just coming back briefly to the role of the police, army, and intelligence service. Clearly the state failed to respond effectively for at least the first 4 days. More often than not, police were seen to be standing and doing nothing, and this emerged as a common picture through the early days of the unrest. But I don't want to reduce it to that superficial analysis. It goes deeper to how our police forces are organized, what is called the visible police and what they are trained to do as opposed to the public order unit. And therefore, and then also, if it was to be characterized as insurrection, then it will be rational to deploy a significant number of forces to your national key points and so on, leaving less for the ground and ordinary people. We accept that. But many people, including ordinary citizens, the media, political analysis, and commentators, have asked these questions about the role of the police, the defense, and intelligence forces during this period. And the conclusion is that they were unable, the intelligence services in particular, were unable or seemingly unwilling to brief the leadership appropriately. And I think submissions that have been made to the Commission seem to confirm this assertion. So, given the unfolding chaos in the first 3 to 4 days of the burning and looting with no proper direction and assistance from the police, ordinary people, some with the assistance of private security companies, were compelled to seek to protect their person and property, including their homes and businesses, and they reacted by putting up barricades and other structures. It appeared as though in some areas the police had outsourced their functions to private security companies. The President's final decision to deploy the army was largely welcomed and inspired hope. However, we must say that the significant gap between the announcement and actual implementation was very disappointing and indicative of a very worrying lack of capacity to respond to what was indisputably a national emergency. It took several days to achieve significant and visible deployment of the army, and according to media and other reports, provincial government and the business sector had to support the army to resolve basic logistics. Although in our view it's also a good thing because we want that kind of social compact to develop. Coordination within the security cluster and between the security cluster and provincial stakeholders was found wanting, further limiting the ability to provide clear leadership. So, as is well known, the President has characterized the unrest as an attempted insurrection. It is therefore understandable that the state's limited resources, I've made this point already about being deployed to national key points, harbors, water reservoirs, and telecommunication centers, leaving limited resources for general deployment. This does not, however, excuse the failure of intelligent and effective coordination of the resources that were available. This is not to say that the police were totally unhelpful, and we want to be balanced in our submission. There are examples where the police were deployed and responded. For example, in the early days of the arson and looting, the police were running between Greytown and Moy River, leaving one hot spot to get to another, and as indicated later here, police in some areas did work well with other structures to prevent destruction and violence. So amidst the ghastly shadow that hung over our province in July 2021, stories of outstanding leadership and courage have emerged, and these provide a beacon of hope for what is possible during times of organized violence, looting, and destruction. And we try to cite some examples which we referred to below. So in the Coxted municipality, for example, it was the mayor himself, the mayor of the Greater Coxted Municipality, Councillor Begum Tolo, who brought together a non-racial group of people comprising representatives from local community organizations, business, police, and agricultural organizations to forge a common approach to dealing with the threat and to ensure that persons and property were protected. And the effect was that this municipality emerged unscathed from the July violence. So it's not surprising that this mayor was re-elected in the last elections. And it's not surprising also that just last week they were announced amongst the municipalities with the best governance record. In Chatsworth, the police and community police forum worked together to ensure that repeated attempts to attack and destroy the Chatsworth Centre were not successful. They secured key access points and created a perimeter of security. The Pavilion Shopping Centre, collaboration with joint action by police and private security, prevented the threats there. In the absence of such efforts, I have no doubt that Durban would have lost one of its most important economic centres. Other examples are the Gateway in Mshlanga, Northway Mall, Hayfields, and Mill Circles in Pietermaritzburg, and centres in Port Shepstone, Scottsboro, and Shelley Beach. And indeed, it's not in the submission, because when the threats of last week or the week before of the 10th of June arose, we're beginning to see similar collaboration in thwarting such attempts, which is very, very encouraging. So the examples provided above underscore the importance of coordination, collaboration, collective action, committed leadership, and a non-racial approach to addressing problems like those experienced in July 2021. They suggest that political will can overcome attempts at insurrection, and that greater cooperation between police, the community police forum, civil society generally, and private security companies are key to preventing such loss. Of course, the economic damage and loss was significant. It was inevitable that the clearly deliberate targeting and destruction of major food chain stores and distribution centers was going to lead to a food crisis. Indeed, there were early manifestations of this threat, with long queues and a shortage of bread a few days after the violence began. In one instance, bread was selling at 58 rand a loaf. And as I said, it required an extraordinary effort by national and provincial government, as well as business, to reopen the N3 and N2, secure fuel supply, and restore supply lines. If this had not been relatively speedily achieved, food security would have taken the crisis to possibly unmanageable levels. A special tribute must be paid to a myriad of civil society and religious organizations who undertook the free distribution of food, bread, and milk to vulnerable communities. And at that point, the civil society effort exceeded the effort of the state in this critical endeavor. Of course, the damage to the economy of our province has been devastating. It's estimated that the infrastructure, equipment, and stock losses will be at least 20 billion, with approximately 30,000 jobs lost. I think there's a revised figure now, but at that point, that was the estimate. Of course, the impact of reduced investor confidence will be something many times over. So the unrest is quite simply aggravated poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And we've attached a report prepared by the Department of Economic Affairs, which provides a detailed account of the assessed damage as at 18th August 2021. I think it requires detailed study and analysis, because it really brings home, sometimes memories are short, and the extent of it across the province. I think some of the reports will give it per municipality, per district. We thought it fit to make an input on what was characterized as a Phoenix massacre. Acts of violence and killings occurred in Phoenix, but unlike similar incidents in other areas, took on a particular racial form. Like many others, we too are outraged and appalled by the brutality of the violence that marked some of the incidents. We condemn the perpetrators who carried out these vicious acts without qualification, and strongly believe that the law must take its course in bringing the perpetrators to book. I think I need to add that the perceptions that then arose, and we'll refer to it later, but then caused division and anguish throughout the province. We are of the view, however, that the Commission should make a conscious effort to distinguish between the actions of the perpetrators of violence from those of the community as a whole. In our experience and from the information we have available, the overwhelming majority of people involved in self-protection acted lawfully and in a disciplined fashion, as did the hundreds of other groups who patrolled the streets in most residential areas throughout the province. We believe that the labeling of the entire Phoenix community and through the characterization of the events in Phoenix as a, inverted commas, massacre has demonized the entire Indian community because of the actions of a few. And actually 2 has a Roman numeral 2, is an article by Professor Chetty which highlights how language is key to influencing perceptions and behavior, and explains that labeling is especially dangerous in societies where social cohesion is often an elusive goal. And I think it might be good if the Commission could do some international comparisons as well in societies that have repeated what they now call communal violence, and how they seek to approach it in a way that does not escalate and aggravate. So we have grave reservations about attempts to characterize the deaths in Phoenix as a massacre for the following reasons. The term massacre is usually associated with the idea of mass killings carried out at the same time and in the same place. Partly one of the reasons for our earlier questions of that detailed information. In Phoenix, the killings did not occur at the same time, nor did they occur in the same place. Unfortunately, international organizations such as the United Nations, Amnesty International, and the International Criminal Court do not define the term massacre, where I think it, in ordinary language, it has a particular connotation. But what it can't be is it can't be acontextual. So it has been stated that the term massacre, being a synonym of butchery, carnage, is by nature hyperbolic or subjective, primarily used in partisan description of events. So there's no neutral definition, although some authors using the term may lay down general working definitions of what they mean by the term. We are therefore of the view that the use of the term massacre to describe the events that occurred is not objective and neutral. Instead, it reflects a subjective and partial perspective of the matter. Now, the evidence available about the circumstances, timeline, and geographic location of the people who died in Phoenix has not been presented to the public as yet, and we believe that it is critical for such information to be released to inform how the killings that occurred in Phoenix should be characterized. We note that it is alleged that there were 36 deaths in Phoenix, and I must pause to remind that it's against the backdrop of 340 in the province as a whole, and that there were initially 28 arrests. But the chart sheets of those arrests do not seem to reflect the extent of death reported. So again, there's a reconciliation that needs to be done. We also believe that the narrative of Phoenix massacre was initially driven by false information in the media that 300 bodies found in the Phoenix mortuary were due to killings that took place in Phoenix. The MEC for Health in KwaZulu-Natal corrected this misrepresentation by explaining that Phoenix mortuary is a regional mortuary and that we're from many areas and not only Phoenix, and may even include natural deaths. Nonetheless, the damage was done. The narrative held, and race relations in KZN were severely damaged. The context in which the killings occurred in Phoenix is key to deciding on how they should be characterized. I refer to it being used in a contextual way, we contest. As is well known, the lack of police presence and the delayed response of the SANDF led communities through community policing forums, private security firms, and community patrol groups to arm themselves with all manner of weapons, including guns. In addition, rampant social media messages threatening to attack Indians raised deep fear and panic in many communities. Many communities were therefore expecting large groups of people to come into their areas to attack them and damage property and businesses. Therefore, by and large, in their minds, they were defending themselves, their families, their properties, etc. Tragically, some individuals were involved in the protection of their communities.
Microphone, just make sure that it's on, please. There we are.
Thank you. However, there were some individuals who were involved in the protection of their communities through private security firms, acted completely outside the boundaries of human rights, resulting in heartbreaking and avoidable deaths. In this regard, the law must take its course. The rule of law must prevail. The continued characterization of the killings as a massacre is also being used by individuals and organizations to deepen racial division and discord. One organization has justified its heavily laden racial social media posts and has actively fanned the flames of racial division and conflict by referring to this in one of their posts, and we've provided it as an annexure, Roman 3. Also, sensational reporting by the media first shaped and then entrenched the narrative. We believe that these media reports violated the South African Press Code of Ethics and Conduct, which calls for reporting that is responsible and contextual. We therefore record our concern about irresponsible and acontextual reports, which should be governed by the Press Code. So this narrative has sponsored the promotion of violence by perpetuating racial hostilities. And this also served to detract attention from the instigators of violence. We are in the age of social media, which worldwide has been associated with promoting division and hate speech that is often accompanied by fake news. The use of social media in inciting violence, chaos, and in creating and promoting fake news during the July must be investigated. It is our humble view that the Commission should compel evidence about the state's forensic investigation capability to unravel this phenomenon. And when we talk about agents provocateurs, just cite one example. So after the violence broke out and the racial tensions were at its height, one Metro policeman shot another. And the post was that a black African policeman had shot an Indian policeman, and it was part of the tension. And an investigation that was found to be false. In fact, it was a completely domestic dispute between two black policemen which was involved in that incident. But the person who posted that was wanting to really deepen the crisis, provoke more conflict. So the state's forensic investigation capability is something that we think needs to be gone into. We believe it will be found wanting by reasons of either political will and or lack of technical and human resource skill. It may also be necessary to call expert witness testimony with regard to the above and whether our legislative framework is adequate to deal with this 21st century threat. We wish to be categoric in denouncing clear racism by some South Africans of Indian descent. We condemn such racism as we do racism from any other sector, including some from the black community who inter alia say Indians must go back to India. But we must not be distracted by this racism. Yes, we must expose it and consequences must flow. But we believe that such racists are located in the extremes of our spectrum, not in the mainstream, which must be mobilized and led for the common national good. That's fundamental to the way forward. In attempting to arrive at a deeper understanding of the incidents, we go into the historic context of social, spatial, economic, and racial tensions between Indian and African communities. Of course, a long period of colonial rule and the recent decades of apartheid helped determine how all of our four main racial groups conceive of their identities as well as the identities of others. This history has shaped the way many South Africans see themselves and the way they see people of other racial groups. The arrival of Europeans in South Africa over 3 centuries ago, their gradual conquest of indigenous African people.
Sorry, your mic is off again.
The establishment and exercise of colonial control over Africans and later apartheid all had major impacts on group identity formation. Deliberate attempts by successive colonial and apartheid governments to separate African and Indian communities, combined with the 1949 Cato Manor riots and the 1985 Inanda riots, provide key starting points to unraveling the nature of the relationship between Indian and African communities, especially in Phoenix. People from the British colony of India began to arrive in South Africa in large numbers after the British abolished slavery throughout their empire in 1833, forcing settlers to seek new forms of cheap labor. Although these people came from territories that now constitute the countries of India and Pakistan, in southern Africa they were known collectively as Indians. Most came as indentured workers forced to endure harsh labor conditions, particularly on sugar plantations. Other immigrants were passenger Indians who paid for their travel by themselves with the goal of finding better economic prospects. They generally came from a merchant background and set up retail shops, but this had the consequence of competition with European shop owners and led to widespread discrimination. The Indian population was concentrated in what was then Natal colony, where by 1904 they had expanded enough to outnumber white South Africans in the region. Prior to formal apartheid, Indian and African communities lived together as neighbors in many of the areas, including Inanda. However, after the adoption of apartheid as a formal policy by the nationalist government in 1948, apartheid spatial settlements were designed to protect the white minority, marginalize the African community, and set up others as buffer groups or buffer strips. So our oppression as a broader black community was hierarchical, designed to advance the divide and rule strategy. The infamous 1949 riots, during which over 140 people died, represented one of the more shameful points in South African history. Many reports have revealed that these riots were instigated by the apartheid state to drive a wedge between Indian and African communities. The riots, which took the form of some Africans attacking Indians, has left an indelible scar on the psyche of Indian people, and fear of similar incidents occurring always lurks in their subconsciousness. Similarly, the 1985 Inanda riots, which occurred near what we now know as Phoenix, led to the forced removal of Indian people who were living in areas near Phoenix. The 1985 riots had no closure. Unlike in 1949, there was no commission of inquiry or an investigation into what happened. Indians were attacked and forced to relocate from Inanda. Ostensibly, that was the motive, but it left a deep-seated scar in the minds and hearts of many in the Indian community who were victims of this forced removal. So the 1985 riots resulted in Indian people who had previously lived in Inanda moving to nearby Phoenix, and July 2021 rekindled horrific memories and generated fear and panic. After 1994, the democratic state has been unable to deal with waves of unplanned urbanization. The consequence is that poor and marginalized black South Africans often live in informal settlements within or close to working or middle-class communities. This creates conditions that are a recipe for contradiction and conflict. We also attached two very important reports. Firstly, the report of the Special Committee on Social Cohesion, which was led by a very eminent team led by Professor Paulus Zulu, and then a report on the Special Reference Group on Migration and Community Integration in KwaZulu-Natal, led by former international judge Navi Pillay. And we put forward these two reports because they really go deeply in analyzing the socio-economic and consequently political makeup of KZN. And we also do so because the provincial government at that time was seized with these issues because these tensions were manifesting themselves in various forms. And it provides a very sharp analysis of the socio-economic framework. And it concludes that it's economic inequality that's at the root of this instability. So notwithstanding the above, there are numerous and consistent attempts to bridge the divide, build social cohesion, and advance nation building. Of course, the provision of proper housing and infrastructure to replace informal settlements and appropriate service delivery must undoubtedly become a priority on our developmental agenda. You can start to reflect on social cohesion and nation building. Historically, many heroes and heroines from the national liberation struggle have played an active role in overcoming racial barriers and animosities created by colonialism and apartheid. For example, it was joint interventions of leaders such as Nkosi Albert Luthuli and Dr. Monty Naika that contributed to subduing the 1949 riots and laid the foundations for improved race relations. And it was the now famous Three Doctors Pact of Doctors A.B. Puma, Yusuf Dadu, and Monty Naika that paved the way for all racial groups to work together to end apartheid. So this pact, the Doctors Pact, remains a lodestar in our historical journey and quest for non-racialism. Of course, the adoption of the Freedom Charter at Kliptown, the formation of the UDF, and ultimately the adoption of our 1996 Constitution are the other major milestones in a progressive trajectory with periodic setbacks. It is clear, though, that the noble ideal of non-racialism has not been achieved, and that we have much work to do to transform attitudes, values, stereotyping, and power relations across all racial groupings in South Africa. The impact of colonialism and apartheid has left enduring negative legacies in all communities. It is therefore not surprising that the racialized fault lines have carved themselves into the fabric of our society, and that these would be exposed at times of tension and conflict. In recognizing this, the organization and individuals supporting this submission have also undertaken several initiatives directed towards social cohesion and nation building. For example, organizations in Phoenix and Pietermaritzburg have initiated programs and activities to begin to address decades-long racial tensions. The KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Government's Social Cohesion and Moral Regeneration Council and religious bodies have also initiated programs to advance social cohesion and nation building. While these initiatives are welcomed, it is submitted that these social cohesion programs can no longer be ad hoc or fragmented. They have to be mainstreamed and be part of programs at all three spheres of government, and even find creative expression in the school syllabus. We also submit that building a culture of accountability is an important part of the tasks ahead. It's commonly known that we've been grappling with the challenge of nurturing, growing, and entrenching a culture of accountability and to extinguish the culture of impunity we spoke about earlier on. We therefore call on the Commission to strengthen efforts to build a culture of accountability, and this will apply to A, office bearers and organs of state that bore responsibility for inaction or deliberate promotion of the violence, especially in the intelligence services, the South African Police and the South African Defence Force. the perpetrators of the violence, some of whom have been arrested and are facing judicial process, those who instigated, incited, organized, and implemented various acts to cause and sustain the unrest for that period in July. And we accordingly recommend, Honourable Chair and Commissioners, as follows. Prior to finalizing its report and recommendations, okay, it's a bit dated now because I think one of these reports have already been released, but we were suggesting that the Human Rights Commission engages with the Commission for Religious and Linguistic Rights, the President's expert panel chaired by Professor Sandy Africa, and the Department of Justice who engaged in what is called the Restorative Justice Program, with a view to deepening insights and ensuring that the different reports do not contradict each other and thereby prevent or avoid confusion in the public domain. B, the Human Rights Commission initiates or facilitates a much more thorough investigation into various identified aspects of the unrest, and the Commission should use its power of subpoena to compel specific evidence from the SAPS and other institutions. For example, the head of the Phoenix Mortuary should testify and produce all records relating to deceased persons brought to the mortuary in the period 8 to 31 July. All other mortuary heads should provide similar records. The SAPS should provide evidence that answers all the questions raised in this submission, especially those raised in paragraphs B4 and B2. V41 and V42. Our President should, within a set time frame, report on the outcomes of his efforts to understand the failure of intelligence, police and defense to avoid and or effectively deal with the unrest. More importantly, the President should report on steps taken to improve capacity, enforce accountability and consequence management, and ensure that there will not be a recurrence. Accountability and consequence management must apply to all without exception, and especially members of the executive and administrative heads of particular institutions. I must say we've seen some evidence of a positive response, and in particular in relation to the threats that were there for the 10th of June. We saw evidence of what should have happened in July 2021, but I think we're far from having built the full capacity. The primary cause of the unrest was the planned and coordinated instigation by persons who did so in pursuit of a political agenda. Such persons must be speedily identified and prosecuted. Yes, since this submission, we know about the 12 that are appearing in court, but I think the consensus is, on the basis of information in the public domain, that they were at best peripheral or secondary. Our colonial and apartheid past has left us with deep fault lines in our social fabric. These fault lines must become the focus of urgent, creative, and sustained social cohesion and nation-building efforts. The views and participation of all sectors, especially youth and women, should also inform the content of any ensuing efforts. Very importantly, from a practical point of view, we recommend that to call on authorities to ensure that the code of conduct for community police forums is strengthened and popularized and enforced through inter alia widespread training of members of CPFs. I think CPFs are a very big and important part of the solution going forward. But if it's loose and untrained, and in the time of a major crisis, that lack of training might show itself. So in conclusion, Honourable Chair and Commissioners, we once again thank the Human Rights Commission for this initiative. It is very important for the nation in many respects. The Commission has been tasked with investigating the causes of the July 2021 unrest, the failure to prevent it and deal with it adequately once it occurred. And we believe that the Human Rights Commission's findings and recommendations will have a major implication for the future of our country. It is an onerous responsibility, and we wish the Commission all strength as you execute your task. The July 2021 unrest has been correctly described as the biggest shock and disruption to our post-1994 democratic transition. It has exposed and sharpened historical societal fault lines. The capacity of state institutions charged with governance has been seriously questioned. It has further damaged our already seriously weakened economy and aggravated the COVID-19 pandemic economic damage. Confidence was shaken in society and the investor community. I must say that we believe that we have been rebuilding, and I believe that our leadership and the Premier in particular has been trying to rebuild that confidence, engaging business communities, and we hope that, well, if the Commission should wish to have it, we can perhaps submit reports on what work has been done in that regard and what has been the outcome of it. So we believe the work of the Human Rights Commission is an important pillar to rebuilding confidence, and the credibility and integrity of the outcome of the Commission will depend on both the thoroughness and frankness with which all issues are confronted. We respectfully refer the Commission to the annexures to this submission, some of which are quite voluminous, and but there are certain others which are not so long, which are what we call rooted statements. In other words, if you take the statements by Previn Verdin, who lives and operates in the Chatsworth Chalkors area, Shah Maraj, whom you've heard before this Commission from the Phoenix Ubuntu Forum, Selwyn Shetty from the Port Shepstone area in the south, Roshan Jainath, Peace and Development Forum, Peter Marisburg, and Yunus Karim, I think we all know he was a long-standing member of Parliament, they reflect the extent to which this submission is grounded. And you'll see that they will talk about practical, real things that happened, exposing racism where it occurred, exposing violence where it occurred, but also talking about the work that was done and I think the strength is their commitment to say, yes, we've suffered a blow here, but we're not going to be knocked out. We're going to roll up our sleeves and rebuild. We submit that these inputs are balanced and reflecting the positives and negatives about what happened. The Democracy 2021 project by the Center for Analytics and Behavioral Change is goes into. Of course, societal tensions are commonplace worldwide, and as we've been explaining, there are some specific fault lines in KZN, and this has received attention from time to time. And I come back to the report which I've spoken about. This is, I don't need to repeat that. Those are two very authoritative reports which you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel to a certain extent. But both reports conclude, amongst other things, that economic inequality and economic exclusion are at the root of division and instability. At the personal impact level, we'd like to refer the Commission to an article by Ila Gandhi, whom you heard earlier on, to demonstrate the significant insecurity and fear which often lead to panic and irrational action by individuals. In the midst of all the above, it is clear that the rule of law in our Constitution becomes sacrosanct as we seek to move the current and future generations forward, away from a past of division and conflict. Accordingly, conclude with the following very instructive extract as we started from the preamble to the South African Constitution, which reads that we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustice of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this Constitution to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Lay the foundations for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by law. To improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person, and build a united and democratic South Africa able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. We believe we have come far. Yes, this is a setback, but we have no other option but to rebuild, roll up our sleeves and rebuild. Chairperson, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, MEC. Mr. Jones, if there are any questions from your side, we'll give you the first opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you. For the opportunity again to ask questions. We have engaged with the submission from the group that you represent. I'll focus my first few questions on race, racial tensions, and the Phoenix massacre. As the evidence team, we have gotten stats from the mortuaries around KZN, together with the SAPS CAS information, and this includes Phoenix. And the information we have is that approximately 80 deaths from the Phoenix mortuary are being investigated as deaths due to the unrest. Deaths resulting from gunshots, from blunt force, head injury. So unlike the definitions that you carefully went and selected in your submission, with a simple Google search, the first definitions of massacre that come up are the following: an indiscriminate and brutal slaughter of many people, and to deliberately and brutally kill many people. It mentions no single time or single location. So, Mr. Pillay, why do you have a problem with the definition or with defining what happened in Phoenix as a massacre?
Thank you very much. I think it's twofold. I note you speaking of 80. I'm not aware of any breakdown that has been put into the public domain that locates these deaths in time and space, including the details that I've requested that be, or submitted should be requested from the mortuary. I think it's only that that's going to give you a location in time and space and method. That's going to be the first instance to a characterization. This happened over several days. The probabilities are that it happened over several days in certain specific incidents. I think the MEC's, MEC for Health confirmation that the Phoenix mortuary is a regional mortuary, where bodies from a very wide area would be brought to it. So until those details are available, the first factual assessment of it, we believe, is premature. That's the reason we contest it. But secondly, we ask the question against the backdrop of our history, and in that particular context, what is the responsibility of leadership, which would include the media? Do you use a narrative that would aggravate? And that's simply our submission. We believe that there's nothing better than the absolute truth. It must be dealt with, whatever the truth is. But in the absence of that information, we contest that particular narrative. That does not mean we contest that this was a horrific incident. It was very painful. The brutality of some of the instances was clearly imbued with a horrendous racism. We don't dispute that.
So if the assessment is done And in line with your own definition, you would then be happy to also characterize it as a massacre.
It's premature. I mean,
No, no, let's assume the authorities corroborate the submissions we've received, the information we have from the mortuaries, which you don't have at the moment, which I hope will be reflected in the report that the Commission will produce. So if there is incontrovertible evidence, would your position change?
Absolutely. If the facts force that conclusion, they're not. It's a time and space and method is key to that characterization.
Thank you. We heard from one of the signatories of your submission, Mr. Shem Maharaj, that there has never been an issue between black and Indian communities. So if there's never been an issue and no prejudices are held, why were a few WhatsApp messages able to create issues of fear of black people overnight if no issues existed?
Well, I didn't listen to Mr. Maharaj's submission, but this own submission went to the trouble to trace a particular history. It even submits those very authoritative reports, and we repeatedly talk about fault lines. Now, what do we mean when we talk about fault lines? That there are issues that need to be dealt with, and there have been consistent attempts to deal with it. But these are fault lines that are, as some of the words used, carved in the fabric of society, which will then manifest itself in a time of tension and crisis. And we go back to the reports by Professor Zulu and Judge Nabi Pillay that drills down to economic inequality as a root cause. But even then, people live together, people work together, people continue to do that. But when there's panic, rationality sometimes goes out of the window. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question. I've spoken about historical division, economic inequality, and if you want, look, I think you need to, if I think that's where you're heading. As a country post-1994, we have not solved the problems of racism. I mean, it's there in all sectors of society, and it's something we have to work on. But we're making a grave mistake if we seek to stereotype an entire community because of the actions of a few. I think that's a key issue for our submission.
Thank you. As the group, do you perhaps know why is it that black people were attacked or killed, or why did the Indian community feel they needed to protect themselves from black people?
I think there was unrest. There were messages going around of the kind that created this panic. It was not limited to the Indian community of Phoenix, that where groups got together and patrolled. There were many non-racial groups that got together and defended. So it will depend on that assessment of that particular situation, where what was the situation on the ground. Now it's clear that some of it became racial profiling, and that's what we must reject. And again, it becomes part of that fault line that starts to reflect itself. I mean, even I myself in a suburban area I had to intervene for a colleague and went there, and there was nothing violent about it or anything like that, but there was a subconscious attitude that spoke to racial profiling. So I think that's what happened in part, but our issue is to then extend that to labeling of an entire community.
With reference to the history set out in your submission, as well as the assertion that it is not all Indian people, we have to acknowledge that systemic racism, the idea that it is a small number of individuals, is unhelpful in treating the systemic problem. I want to go further to say it is normal, everyday people who refused to fight against apartheid, who kept quiet, who bought into the hierarchy, that they were not quite white, but better than black people, that kept apartheid in place for so long. So the question is, why should the collective, everyone who has not fought against the system, why should the collective not be held responsible?
I'm shocked at your question.
No, it is important.
No, I'm shocked at your question because you're impliedly seeking to label everyone.
The question is why...
But let me answer the question. Yeah. If you want to have an indicator of support for apartheid or not, then you would look at those who participated in the tricameral elections. I think the number is 6%. I think that's a strong indicator of a rejection of the apartheid system. If you want to look at participation in the struggle, I think there are many, many examples. Did everybody in society as a whole participate in the struggle? How do you define participating in the struggle? But I think there's a more than proportionate representation of all communities in participation. Not completely proportionate, but sufficiently significant. So when we cite people like Bram Fischer or Joe Slovo, they were examples of the dream for the society we want to build. Of course, apartheid and colonialism had its impact, set the basis for racism, which continues to this day, and we have to work at it. So again, I think what is the task of leadership? When Chris Hani was assassinated and the country teetered on the brink of civil war, when Nelson Mandela went, and some say that's the day he became the president, he went on TV to remind all of us that it was a white woman who had the presence of mind to notice this person and vehicle and take the registration number, which led to his arrest a few kilometers away. So the point is, what is the task of leadership at a particular point in history? And that's what we're calling for, to bring us together. If you want to go to look for, it's important to deal with racism, put it on the table, hold people accountable, and so on. Our difficulty is when you start to escalate it to labeling an entire community.
No, thank you. I think there's context to the question. So it's not just, we're not asking for the sake of asking. These are the questions we need to answer in preparing your report, because we've received other submissions, which sort of differ from what you've submitted. So it is not out of malice that I'm posing these questions.
No, I appreciate
is to
that.
also help the report writer and the panel to make an evaluation and a final determination. So, how does your social cohesion plans attempt to address racism if those plans won't acknowledge the systemic insidiousness of how it plays out in society?
Look, firstly, it will be completely arrogant and inappropriate to think that any one group could, on their own, develop a plan. It has to bring people together. The people together must develop this plan. I think some of the engagements and conversations that are happening, and it's slow and painful. I think the first step is to acknowledging there's a problem, having frank talk about it, and then to collectively determining a way of building. My own view, and this is, I haven't gone into the deep, it's not a deep part of the submission because we believe it has to be something that's produced together, is that there are several aspects to it. I think there's a soft and hard side to it. The soft side to it is basically drawing on our Ubuntu, which I think all communities embrace. It's an integral part of every community's value system. To drawing on that to consciously work together and provide platforms to work together. The soft side in terms of understanding and appreciating each other's culture and language and matters of that nature. The hard side is the economic inequality issues. And that's where that matter, continues to be a matter of contestation. How is affirmative action interpreted? Why it is so necessary? How can we have programs that work better, that have better impact? It talks to the procurement system and whether the corruption that's sometimes there, that some people will seek to criminalize even our transformation efforts, which I disagree with. So we need to develop a common understanding of the imperative of economic transformation. But I think also that we need to bring a greater transparency and indisputable integrity to that process. So there's a lot of hard work for a lot of people, right from the president at the top to all of us at the bottom.
Just left with two questions, Chairperson. There were people in Phoenix and other parts of KZN who were pulled out of their cars, were beaten up, some were humiliated and degraded, several, as I mentioned earlier on, were killed. And there was a view by those who made submissions in Durban that what happened in Phoenix amount to a massacre. So the question to you, as we have talked to issues of social cohesion, how do we forge a common future when the experiences of the victims are not acknowledged? Their definition is not accepted until there's a factual assessment. How do we then forge a common future? And ensure that we build integrated communities that will not live in a climate that is thick with suspicion and paranoia?
I think my answer will be in two parts. The first is we've got to do that hard work, both on the soft side and the hard side, as I've explained. We've got to condemn and expose those who do wrong. You've got to call out racism whenever it happens. So those who pulled out people, assaulted them or killed them, they must face the law. The consequence must be seen to be happening. Just like those who are guilty of corruption or or the destabilizing that we have spoke about. You see, what happens when you're negligent with a match in a tinderbox? We've got to understand our condition. And while we're doing that work, are we reckless to further the division? And understand context. In the work that I do, I'm acutely aware of the pain that was felt, not just by the victims and their families of the violence, but across society, because it was felt as some of those videos that went around was not just an act of violence, it was a dehumanizing act of violence. And that was painful, and every one of us must acknowledge that and seek to do everything necessary to take us away from that. But I also want to, I just want to, with your permission, just to give you a sense, beyond the theoretical analysis. Apologies, Chair. If I can find it. Now, whatever the objective facts are, when the subjective reaction is a state of panic of the kind that I've played, then you get bad things happening. Our task as leaders must be to say how we're going to prevent this happening. And I must also, in the same way you're asking the questions, pose the question, and in fairness to you, you might have done it in other contexts. Who are the instigators that must bear the major culpability, knowing that these are the conditions, these are the fault lines that exist? So, yes, it's a task, and I think you and the Commission and its findings is going to be a lodestar for us going forward.
Just on that, would you say instigators took advantage of I'll say imploding race relations?
I don't think it was intended. I honestly don't think it was intended. I think it was reckless. And maybe, I know your Commission might not have the capacity, and I keep saying that future researchers are going to write master's and doctoral theses on this when you analyze the mass of the social media communication. From the panic one of this type, from the genuine ones, from the fake ones. I think it was an unintended consequence, but I do believe it was reckless. But the main agenda remained diabolical, and that was to destabilize the economy and have the consequences which I spoke about in the submission.
Okay, my last question. Do you think the unrest in KZN created intergroup conflict, foregrounded stereotypes, and triggered discriminatory responses?
Yeah, the answer would be largely yes. The last part about triggered discriminatory responses, I think I would just tweak that a bit to say that
it's more on racial profiling.
Yes. But I don't think it was, allowing your subconscious fears to take over. You see, and that's what's happened when you lose control, because So even in the neighborhood watches, for example, even if the police were stretched, but if you had 30 members in a neighborhood watch, but you could allocate one policeman there, so that to make sure that discipline and control remains, rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you know what I mean.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm now going to give an opportunity to Commissioner Ntuli, who has joined us online. If you have any questions, Commissioner.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Commissioner Bam. Mr. Pillay, thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon, and thank you for your presentation as well. Chairperson, at this moment, I do not have any questions except to thank Mr. Pillay for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ntuli. Commissioner Nissen.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Mr. Pillay. I've just got a few comments and questions, and you can respond to it. The Commission is on record here during the hearings in the first week or second week of the hearing, where we said that we do not blame, or well, let me put it this way. We said that the whole of the Phoenix community is being looked at by those individuals who allegedly committed those acts of violence and killings. And we also said, of course, what the other communities like Bambai and the others were looking for was justice in terms of the arrest of those who allegedly did that. And so, and again, you said that the charge sheet will obviously show, not the charge sheet, the post-mortem, the forensics report will indicate how that particular individuals came to their demise. But the understanding coming from this hearing is that not the whole of Phoenix, because there were also pockets of goodwill that existed in that community. The same thing with what happened in Khan Road in Pietermaritzburg and the work of Roshan in that area and bringing different communities together. So then the second thing, Mr. Pillay, is when you talk about restorative justice, now, if reconciliation also has a sister called justice and fairness. And so I think what we need to do is to maybe look at it and say, how would you define restorative justice, especially when there's still some pain and hurt on both sides, and how are we going to do that? And would your premier, in your normal life, your premier came also here and talked about a potential peace park or monument within the broader Phoenix area of Bambai or Zwilisha and so on. Then the last thing from my side, one of the things that the Commission set itself out to do in these hearings and trying to, in the end also our recommendations would be also how do we take social cohesion forward. Now, would you agree with me that and you mentioned the former president, the late President Nelson Mandela, how he handled the situation around the late Krisani. But he also started, as one of the key pillars in his presidency, was the issue about nation building. And have we lost the plot when it was called the national question? And since his passing, we have seen very little of the national question, which is nation building and social cohesion. What are your comments on this? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Well, just on the first point, I think there were many pockets of goodwill. And even using the term pockets, I'm a bit hesitant. But again, those affidavits, David set that out. Even where in the course of observing a racial brutal attack, it was another member of the Indian community who intervened and provided support and help. And of course, as you said, the Maritzburg incidents and so on. But the cohesion is can't be an act of charity. It has to be genuine working together with mutual respect. I think that's going to be important. With regards to restorative justice, I think that's an important point. I think it emerged, it's not part of our submission, it's only quoted as part of the, I think the Department of Justice's work. That's something that has been in progress. I think that's an ongoing conversation. Again, it's not something to be imposed. I'm not sure if I'll be breaching protocol because I'm not here as MEC. But I think in the cause of the greater good, I think there's a conversation which, in engaging with victims, they might be feeling that the Peace Park or monument is not an appropriate way. There's more recent conversations. So I think the important thing is that we're talking to people and searching for appropriate restorative justice. I don't think it's something I want to even suggest and impose. I think it must come out of that engagement. What I can say is between the provincial government and victims, there's an ongoing conversation about it. How to take social cohesion forward I think is the big question. I think the first step is to identify it as a key issue, that it must find institutional expression. I think even using the word nation building is an important thing, as opposed to just social cohesion is sometimes interpreted as an abstract thing which people don't quite understand. So I would support that nation building as a program, as a message, find central expression. If we talk about, and if we accept the issues that economic inequalities, some of the roots of the challenge, then we stretch that to the social compact that we must also build. And so in KwaZulu-Natal, we've been, as part of the Economic Council, brought government, business, labor, and civil society together to deal with economic issues. But in the course of that, we've identified that if there's no social cohesion or nation building, it's a threat, it's a risk to economic growth and stability. So it comes back to the submission where we're saying that it cannot be ad hoc or fragmented. It has to be institutionalized. There has to be a cooperative approach between national and provincial and local government, and in partnership with civil society in all its forms. And civil society in all its forms can be a very powerful force. I think we are struggling to create the best platform for the energy of civil society to find expression. I think there's a gap there. If I want to be harsh, we'll say there's still a trust deficit. And we've got to close that trust deficit. The national question, as I understood it, is very much a political question as part of a narrative from a background I suppose you and I come from. But translated to the national discourse, then it falls squarely within the nation-building issue. For me, it's to understand our history. There was a hierarchical operation, different levels, but we are all trying to be bound together by this constitution, which is very clear in its values and its direction and its transformative intent. And we need to push a critical mass of people to be visibly working together to take us forward and isolate, quite frankly, those who would want to take us back. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you so much, MEC, for your participation, but also in particular for the participation in our proceedings of the much larger group of individuals and organizations that you represent. Thank you also for your very detailed submissions that you made in writing, and you and the other representatives can really be assured that we will indeed look at all of that in a lot of detail. Thank you also to Mrs. Gandhi for the evidence that she has provided earlier. Just one point from my side. I think it's very important that you said that social cohesion, you can call it nation building, or you can call it diversity training, that it should actually become part of the school curriculum or school program, however you want to put it. And we are also very strongly of that belief, and the Commissioner has already been in touch with the National Department of Basic Education, and together with them we are now very strongly looking at the development of such a program for all our schools, and it should not be something that is only rolled out when there is a problem or a crisis in a school with diversity issues, but it should be a matter, of course, for all our schools. And I think that is also something that we will consider to specifically include as recommendations in this report. But thank you very much for that proposal and some of the others you have made. We've certainly also identified the matter of beefing up the community police forums as a critical issue going forward, and in an attempt to make sure that events like this never take place again. So it then leaves it to me to thank the members of the panel, our evidence leader. You gave evidence this afternoon, and everyone who participated in person in oral evidence. The Commission is certainly looking forward now to, as speedily as possible, conclude its work and the provisional report that will then be made available to affected parties for comment. We are working full steam to make sure that that report is finalized as soon as possible. That concludes. Yeah, and let me also not forget, thank you, Acting CEO, to thank the media very much for really giving full coverage to all our hearings. We thank you for that, and thank you also for allowing South Africa, allowing the nation to listen to this evidence, to the important evidence that has been given here at the Commission pertaining to an event that has indeed touched not only the people of KwaZulu-Natal and the people of Gauteng, but indeed all of us in South Africa, which is most surely an event that all of us want to make sure is never ever repeated again in this country. Also like to thank our staff as well as the translators, people involved even here with this facility that have assisted us in making this event possible. Thank you very much. All of the best. We stand up. Thank you.